Hey folks, welcome to another episode of ASP.NET Core from Zero to Overkill. In this episode we'll take a look at middlewares. So I've touched briefly this subject, but let's take a closer look at middlewares and make a bunch of them just to see our options. So middlewares, I'm here in the Microsoft's documentation page because this graphic is really useful to explain why this is useful. So like it says over here, this is similar to in older ASP.NET versions to HTTP handlers, but in this case I think this is not sure if originally, but a bit inspired on Node, the way it worked, Node and Express and all that stuff. So basically a middleware is something we can put in the request pipeline that can handle or enrich a request handling pipeline. So a request enters, it goes into a middleware, then calls the next middleware, then calls the next middleware. But any middleware can interrupt the flow of the request. So if middleware 1 was, for instance, for authorization and the request wasn't authorized, immediately middleware 1 could respond without forwarding to middleware 2. And that's about it. In a nutshell, that's what middlewares are for. Pretty simple, but pretty powerful. Because, for instance, let's go to the application. Let's go into startup. So we made this middleware in the episode regarding the program and startup classes. But, for instance, MVC, it's a middleware as well. Just really more complex middleware. So let's take a look at these middlewares. Before, let me just clean up some stuff that has been sticking around that I used for demo, but we don't need this anymore. When we need these concepts again, we'll introduce as needed. But for instance, for now, we don't need to use a different dependency injection container, so I'll get rid of it. And we'll use the default one. When we need it, I'll put it back, but right now we don't need. And let's delete these configurations because we are also not using them. So let's clean up. Going to the demo, I'll keep the demo, but I will remove these configurations. Controller. This was just for showing how this works, so we'll add it in the future when we need it. More. Okay. Let me just check if this is. Yep, it's working. We removed that. From Yock, I'll delete the out of FAQ. Also don't need it. So it should be done. Let me just check one more thing. What was it? Can't remember. Oh, removing the out of FAQ dependencies that we are not using anymore. So out of FAQ. Okay, we are at the start of the application. Let's keep it simple. So closing this, let's start looking at the middlewares. So in the other episode we saw this app use to create a middleware using a lambda. There are basically two main types. We can do these lambdas, or we can do some classes. So as we saw previously, we could do these lambdas like so. We use the next to invoke the next middleware, both received here, and the context is where we get the response and all that information. Now, what do we if we wanted some dependency injection, all that stuff? So maybe there's a way to do it, but it's probably a bit more complicated. So what we can do, let me go here to the demo, and the folder. And I'm gonna create a new class, and I'll call it quest timing. Ad hoc middleware. Why did I call it ad hoc? You'll see right now. That let me just copy something over here. So okay, so this is by convention. If we implement this method and then configure the middleware, this will be invoked. So we can do something like, so our watch equals new stopwatch, or no, stopwatch start new. Now what I'm doing, I'm missing something. We also need this, because this is a middleware, so we need the next middleware to invoke, so we can do this. But as you see, we don't have it, so we need to create one. So okay, so in the constructor of the middleware, we will receive the next middleware in the chain, in the request pipeline. This is only using this ad hoc middleware. What does it mean? It's by convention, so it will expect to have this constructor, maybe also an anonymous constructor if we didn't need the next. Not sure, didn't try it. And then we can do this next. And now we can stop the watch and write this. So we need a logger. To need a logger in this convention kind of middleware, if we want dependencies, we don't ask for them in the constructor, because this middleware will only be created once, so it will be basically a singleton. So we can't get the dependencies in the constructor. We need to get the dependencies in every request, so when the invoke is invoked. So I want an iLogger of request timing ad hoc middleware, and then we can do logger.trace. Request the time. Sorry. So it's done. This is red because Rider is detecting that this is making a boxing operation. Okay, so we have this. To put this to use, we need to go to Startup, and like over here, for instance, we can do app.use middleware and request timing ad hoc middleware, and it's done. So now we can go here, oh, I remember something. So in our configuration for logging, for starters, I'll comment the file stuff. I don't need files right now. When making some tests, I noticed I forgot this, which is kind of important. This will print the logger, in this case the class, so it will say that it came from this class. And we want it to basically everything from coding militia, we want to trace, from trace to info, and the rest we just want from warning. So in this case, if it's not from here, even if coding militia, it will go here. If I didn't do this, I think it will repeat the logs. So okay, if I didn't make these changes to allow trace, as we are using trace here, it would not work. So okay, it's working. Okay, so these colors are not really good, but okay. So this is logging twice. No, it's because of the page is also requesting the, if you go to network, it's requesting the main page and the favicon. So instead of using, I'll probably use Postman. Use Postman instead, so making a request. These colors are really bad. But okay, we can see there's a trace from this request. Even though 404, because even though 404, if we see here, it will pass through the middlewares, checking if anyone can answer the request. So only when it gets to use MVC, it notices no one can do it, so it goes all the way back over here. So okay, to show what I was saying about it being basically a singleton, let's create here not read only. Lead this is not needed, but I'll do it anyway. This is to atomically increment the value. And now we can do something like this. Let's go back here. Let's make a change because those colors are not great. Okay, so making a request, a warning, request 1, now another one, request 2, request 3, request 4, request 5. So it's important to keep that in mind, that this is a singleton. So there can be race conditions, and if we capture our dependencies, if for instance there are transitive dependencies, we can't keep them in the class. That's why they are injected in the method instead of being injected in the constructor. So it's important to keep that in mind, so we don't end up with memory leaks and stuff like that. But this is one way of doing it. There's another way of creating these classes middleware in another way that it's more, I think I prefer it. It's more as we are used to, injecting the dependencies in the constructor and all that stuff. So the other way of doing the middleware, I think it's called factory. Yeah, factory-based middleware. Oh, okay. So we can create here a class, request timing factory middleware, and in this case we implement our middleware. So in this case we get the HTTP key context and the next on the method, because the lifetime of this middleware, I'm not really sure, but I think it's or I'm sure, yeah, we will configure the lifetime ourselves, so we will register this in dependency injection container, so it will be what we want it to be. So we can, in the other case, because it's a singleton, it keeps the next, because when we only configure the request handling pipeline at the beginning of the application, and it can't be changed, so the next will always be the same next. In this case, the next is received because a new instance of this middleware class will be created every time if we configure like so it can't keep the next, so it's passed on the method. So the logic will be the same. Let me just copy this. Sorry. So in this case, the difference will be the counter. In this case we need a constructor. Construction will get a 9 logger timing factory middleware. So in this case we're back to what we are used to inject the dependencies at the constructor. It is missing the async. The next is not a field. The logger is a field. And the request counter, let me get this here. Okay. So I'm going back to startup class, and I'll do this one. let us check how it goes like this. So starting back up. Okay, make a request, and we got an error because it can't find this middleware. Nice. Like I said, in this case we need to register this middleware in the constructor, in the dependency injection. Let me just fix this here. So you need to go here. And let's see, go again. So making a new request. And now it works. We can see the difference here. This is the logger name, like I mentioned. So let us do more requests. Like we see, the ad hoc is incrementing, but the other one is not, because I registered it as transient. So a new instance is created every time. The other one is a singleton. So it is increasing everything, incrementing every time. So important points. I like this better, but everyone has their preferences. So this is more like a classic approach. We implement an interface, have the method that's invoked every time, and we register our dependencies in the constructor. In the ad hoc case, we get in the constructor the next, we get the HTTP context in every request, and then if we need more dependencies injected, we inject them in the method. So this is basically it for these class middlewares. There is more to it. If you go to the documentation, here they have like how to configure with third-party containers and stuff like that, but not really that important for now. I just want to show middlewares working. So this is it for these class middlewares. So now that we saw both the Lambda middlewares and the class middlewares, let's see the 3 or 4 ways that are available to register them. So we've seen use, which registers the middleware, or use middleware. It's basically the same, just the difference that class or Lambda. So registers a middleware and gets a next. So it's like a middleware that can be forward to the next one or can complete immediately. There's also another way, that is .run, which is basically used immediately when we use in the template. If you saw, the first thing that appears is an app run hello world. So async context y always. Async context, and we can do, so I don't know if I put this here, so context.response.write async. So if I go here, hello, and even if I put groups in, it's hello, because in this case it never goes to the next one. So this could be post, we could put this here. Let me check. So we make this request, we get the groups. If we make, what about, no? Don't you want that? No. Okay. Oh, just me, that's stupid. Okay, so no middlewares could enter the request. So it went through all of these middlewares, the headers, we can see the headers. This is for the next one. Not what I'm looking at. No, these headers. So it went through these middlewares, this middleware, MVC, and then no middleware could do this, so it went here. Okay, so app use, let's you forward to the next or not, you decide. App run always, it's a terminal middleware. So another thing we can do is app.use, map, and we can do something like ping. And what this allows you is to basically branch the middlewares. So we can do, in this case, get here, here I'll put Pong and in here, instead of app, it's builder. So in this case, only if we do ping, it pongs. If you do like this, nope, nothing could handle it. And if you can see here, it's logging every time. So let me just, so both logging middlewares are working. So let's make a change. I'll put this one here, change this to builder. Let's get back here. Okay, so now if you do a ping, you get both logs. But if you go back to groups, for instance, we get one log because it only uses this middleware and this middleware when to ping. So it's not like go here to use just this middleware, but we can do a whole other chain of middlewares branched out for this route. Another way to do this, very similar, is to map when. And in this case, we need a context and I'll do ping again. Then builder. Just copy this. I'll change this to pong from path and from header. I'll move this one here as well. So I think you can imagine what will happen right now. So let's go back here. So we go to groups. We don't know, go compiled. If we go to groups, we got nothing. If you go to ping, we get ping from path, and from the factory request timing middleware logging. If instead we do, for instance, we'll go back to groups. Now if we go to headers and put ping and send it, we got ping from header and a log from the header, so doc middleware is working and incrementing. If we go to ping and keep the header, we get ping from path because of the order. So this is first, this is first. So this is, if we change this is very important to remember, the order by which the middlewares are registered, like you could see. That's why this is the last one, to avoid stopping the pipeline. Now if we do the same, it goes to the other because it's the first one. If I change this, we get ping from path like we were expecting. And that's about it. Maybe there are other more complex uses of middlewares, but this is basically it. So I used the middlewares in these examples for simple stuff, just to show you. But like you saw, for instance, if you wanted to implement a really basic service and didn't want MVC, you could do it just with this. Like we map a route to something like an health check endpoint, stuff like that. If you, for instance, wanted to implement a GraphQL endpoint, you could do it this way, although in that case we needed to parse JSON, so I don't know if it would be the best, maybe. So, okay, so the middlewares are the building blocks for the request handling pipeline. You could do everything with the middlewares. Normally we don't, we use MVC and other things that are prepared out of the box. But this is an important things to keep in mind to do these kinds of endpoints, simple endpoints, more complex endpoints, or just this intermediate stuff that enriches the request, like adding headers or timing the requests, stuff like that. And I think that's about it for this topic on middlewares. Any doubts, as usual, feel free to ask and make suggestions for future episodes and improvements to the application. So hope to see you in the next one. See yous.